The events of April 27th and 28th, 1944, around Slapton Sands on the South Devon coastline in England, although small when compared to some of the major engagements of World War II, none could have come so close to ruining the careful planning of the beginning of the end for the Nazi regime. Events that within 10 minutes would lead to one of the highest death tolls of any World War II maritime engagement, the true scale of which would only come to light in the 1980s. The American Army and Navy used Slapton Sands as a practice ground for D-Day landings on Utah Beach. As D-Day approached, it was decided to make the practice landings as real as possible, to give those taking part the reality of being under fire with live ammunition and radio silence. It was codenamed Operation Tiger. On the very first day of manoeuvres, April the 27th, 1944, thousands of American soldiers were transferred by ships from Brixham and Plymouth to landing craft and landing ships for disembarkation on the beaches of Slapton Sands. The landings took place without incident, but as they moved up the beach, 300 soldiers were killed in a bombardment from live shells. The bombardment should have finished long before the troops moved up the beach, and radio silence certainly did not help matters. You would think that after such a disaster on the first day of the exercise, that more attention would be paid to how things were unfolding. Sadly, not so. The following day, April 28th, even more landing craft and landing ships packed with troops, munitions, tanks and vehicles full of gasoline were in a holding circle off Slapton Sands, manoeuvring for practice landing under full live fire and radio silence once again. Landing ship tanks, LSTs, or large slow targets as the troops nicknamed them, could hold up to 18 Sherman tanks and 160 troops. These things were huge, 328 foot by 50 foot and very, very slow, a maximum speed of just 8 knots. The German High Command had spies in place across the English coastline and corroborated intercepted radio signals regularly. At Cherbourg, the S100 Schnellboats, or S-boats as the Germans called them, E-boats as the Allies called them, were well aware of the high amount of shipping activity around the Devon coastline, having also been alerted by Luftwaffe spotter planes. These were the final months for Hitler and his Nazis, with army groups in retreat on all fronts apart from Europe. On the 10th of April 1944, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, less than 2 weeks before Exercise Tiger, called on every serviceman of the Navy to take risks without consideration for the survival of the ship itself. This encouraged the men of the Kriegsmarine to take greater risks, on some occasions suicidally. Following a succession of dashing and violent night engagements during March and April, the S-boats stationed at Cherbourg had conducted a number of attacks against Allied shipping off the southern coast of England, including on April 22nd a successful attack on British motor gunboats in Lyme Bay, and on the 24th a very successful attack on shipping in the same area. Then, on the afternoon of 27th of April, a Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft reported a convoy of 7 merchant ships off Start Point, England. On the 28th of April, for the S100 Schnellboats stationed at Cherbourg, it was a day that started like any other. Leave port, avoid Allied patrols and go hunting for anything else that floats, and then try and sink it. But this time they had good intelligence on the location of several merchant ships. Luckily for the merchant ships, the S100s came across the landing craft first. 9 S100s split into 2 flotillas, 4 and 5 respectively, headed up the channel a few miles out from the Devon coastline, and spotted a convoy of landing craft and landing ships in a circling pattern with a single destroyer providing cover. There were supposed to be 2 destroyers guarding the landing craft. One, however, had been damaged on the previous day when it collided with the landing craft and was sent back to port for repairs. The lone destroyer and the mixed bag of LSTs, that's landing ship tank, and LSGs, landing ship guns, assumed wrongly and to their cost that the S100s were Allied boats. The S100s went full speed to get ahead of the convoys and attack head-on with torpedoes and flak. The S-boat captains could not believe their luck. The term shooting fish in a barrel comes to mind. Within 7 minutes, 2 LSTs were sunk and 1 heavily damaged. One LST was hit with 2 torpedoes from S-130 and sank almost immediately. The next was hit by a torpedo in the engine room, which set the LST ablaze and sinking slowly. The third limped to beach heavily damaged. The troops on the remaining shallow draft landing craft witnessed tracer rounds flying overhead and ships ablaze assumed that this was all part and parcel of the live fire manoeuvres, until they themselves were raked with flak and machine gun fire. Captains of the ships and craft attempted to warn the destroyer, but to add to their misery that day, they had been given different frequencies to that of the destroyer. The LCTs did, however, try to return fire with no success. The destroyer, suddenly realising that the sinking landing craft were not part of the plan, gave chase at full speed, but all too late. The S100s were already turning for Cherbourg. With radio silence in operation, the scale of the attack would not be known for another 24 hours. Rescue vessels were told to return to port for fear of further attacks. This inevitably added to the death toll. US forces died in the water, either from their wounds, hypothermia, drowning, or burning to death from all the fuel in the water. They left behind them 640 Army and Navy personnel dead. Bodies would be washing up on the shores of Slapton Sands for days after the attack. A truly horrific scene. The Admiralty enforced a news blackout and almost cancelled D-Day due to the amount of unaccounted for officers with sensitive information that were missing. Luckily for the Allies, all the missing officers were accounted for within 48 hours. Months of careful logistical planning would have been for nothing if the officers had not been recovered. D-Day would have been delayed for months or even years if any of those officers fell into the hands of the Gestapo. It was after this attack that it was decided that the Air Force and Navy should do their utmost to destroy as much of the Schnellboat fleet as possible. Shortly before D-Day, Lancasters of Bomber Command dropped tallboy 12,000-pound bombs on the Cherbourg boat pens housing the S100 flotillas, destroying one and damaging several of the 9 boats housed there. Come D-Day, the Kriegsmarine could only muster some 30 S-boats to combat the invasion force, which contained 125 destroyers, battleships and corvettes, as well as numerous Allied PT boats. All the S-boats could do was launch their torpedoes at long range and hope for a lucky strike. S-boats were not designed to fight real warships. They inevitably left the scene and headed back to safe harbours, their tails tucked firmly between their legs. The S130, mentioned earlier, is the only surviving Schnellboat, and is currently part of the Wheatcroft collection undergoing renovation. Over those 2 days in April 1944, almost 1,000 American lives were lost practicing for a landing on Utah Beach. There was no leave given to survivors to recover from the trauma, no time for mourning those who died. They were reassigned to other LSTs and took part in the D-Day invasion. On the 6th of June 1944, D-Day, 197 American soldiers lost their lives taking Utah Beach. In 1984, a Sherman tank was raised from the seabed off Slapton Sands, where it had lain for 50 years and erected as a memorial for those that lost their lives there. Thus ends the tragic story of just one small event that could have seriously delayed the end of World War II. Keep watching, because we're off to the shed in a mo for more of the remote control Italeri 1-35 S100 build. If you enjoy learning about the events and equipment from history, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything and it will encourage me to make more. A thumbs up would be nice too. Next week's video will be all about Hitler's pet monsters and how to build one. Hey up YouTube, as promised, a bit more on the S100 build. As you can see, I've been tinkering today trying to find out why the middle motor wasn't working, and it is burnt out, mainly because I nicked it out of a little toy car when I first built this. The other 2 motors are Tamiya's, so I'm not surprised they're still working, but that middle one does say it was made in China, so no surprises there. Pure Chinesium failure. So anyway, the middle rod, it's a little bit tighter than all the rest, so basically I'm going to have to take that out and reaffix the propeller on the underside as well, because that has come loose. So I don't know how in focus that is, but there we go. Put it back on its stand. I've already taken out the 2 screws. I don't know if you can see those. They're tiny little 1mm screws going through into the I think they call it a capstan that holds the propeller shaft in. So I'm going to take that out now, but first of all I need to take that tubing off. So I'm going to have to clip it and clip it. It's not really going to matter because that motor's got to come out anyway. So now that that's off, I can pull this back a little bit, I think. There we go, all nice and coated in grease, and that should have pulled it out of its little holder, which it has. Yippee-ki-yay. There we go. Now that should just slide off, and it does. So just bear with me, doing this one-handed because I haven't got a gimbal to hold the camera yet. So that's off. I'll have to clean that out, get rid of any grease on there, and re-glue it with some really good super glue. Now the thing about super glue is I've got two types here. One is a quick drying, really thin super glue. That's for quick jobs and when you're butting metal against flat metal. That's really good for that. And the sticky stuff, well, I call it sticky stuff because it stays sticky for ages. This dries in 10 to 30 seconds. It's usually about 45 to be honest. And this is for areas the way you're going to have a bit of a gap, and this will go across those gaps and set nice and hard. So I like this stuff. It's cheap, it's cheerful, and it works. And it's got a high concentration of that, what's it called now? Hang on a minute, it'll tell me. Cyano, whatever it is. The higher the amount of cyano that's in these, the better it sticks, and the higher quality it is. And this is almost 100%, so you can't lose there. You'll have to forgive the state of my hands, by the way. Another tip, I never ever use the squirty tip end of these for applying this glue. I always take the head out and get a bit of wire, dip it in and dab it where I'm going to need it, because quite more often than not you'll get it all down the nozzle, put your lid back on, and you'll never be able to open it again. So nice little tip there. Always open it fully up, use a little bit of rod, dab it on, and off you go. Anyway, let me get a bit of wire and we'll be right there. So, screwdriver will do. I'll dip it in. Get it just where I want it. That'll do. So, let's get the propeller on. Okay, propeller's nicely on. I don't know if you can see in there, in that plastic capstan thing. I've put a little brass grommet in, just to give a bit more wear on it. Obviously plastic model's not going to last too long, but you've got a bit of metal spinning around on the plastic, and that's the same for inside the propeller shaft. It's going to be difficult to see this. I've put another brass grommet right the way through the shaft, which goes over that shaft and then into the brass outer shaft that I put in there. Now one of the things, a bit sad really, I shouldn't have left this model so long. All of the glue's yellowed on it, so this is going to want a really good stripping down before I primer it. Okay, propeller's in. I put the assembly all back together. Steering mechanism's working fine. Next up, I'm going to rig up those batteries, get them all hooked up to the speed controller, which is there, and see what kind of speed we can get out of the two that we got left. I'm going to have to order another, I think it's 540 motors that I've got there. But it's such a long time ago, I just can't remember. Anyway, you'll have to forgive the state of my hands, by the way, because I've been painting and I've made some more shelves for my little work area over there. So you're going to see more of that in action pretty soon. So I'll get this rigged up and I'll show you the speed that we get off the two motors that are there right now. Okay, she's all rigged up. Batteries in. Everything seems to be connected okay. Don't know what happened there. Let's try again, shall we? Right, transmitter on. There we go. And let's see if we get some speed out of it. Let me just angle this round. Oh, nice with the action. Holy shit. Okay. I guess I'm going to need that middle motor because that's a lot of juice going into those two little motors. I don't know if you've watched the first video that I posted. I did show how they were before I took that middle motor offline. It just goes to show how a knackered motor can just bring the whole lot down. Now that's going some serious speed. I cannot wait. I cannot wait to get this on the pond. Okay, that's enough for today. I'm absolutely shagged. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please do subscribe and throw us a like. Bye bye.